What am I doing intentionally to be a better person? Because one, if you're getting to be a better person, you're going to be a better coach. If you help a kid be a better person, he's going to be a better player, a better teammate. If we're not being intentional about those kinds of things, then that's when we lose perspective and we get so focused in the smallest things that don't matter much in life become the biggest things to people.
In life, we face those situations every day. If we can't regenerate ourselves, we can't be energized and continue to push forward. We're gonna struggle a lot in life because life is filled with failure and losing.
What is most important when it comes to youth sports and going to watch our kids' games and coaching youth sports? What are the things that we tend to focus the most energy on or the most attention on when it comes to talking to our kids about the game? It's what Pat and I are talking about in today's episode 15. It's about the things that are most important. And we hope that you will be challenged, and we hope that you enjoy it. And as always, please help us spread the podcast by subscribing so you don't miss a single episode, and by sharing it with others. We really appreciate you helping us pass along the conversation. It's episode 15, and it starts right now.
Welcome back to the Coaching Life Podcast. This is Pat Martin, here with my friend Chris Stewart. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Pat. Having a great Friday. We're recording on a Friday.
Yeah, a little change up.
It is. It's a nice day out.
Don't normally do this. Coach, in the world of sports, there's all kinds of things to consider when coaching. You have technique and strategy, motivation, data. We talked about data earlier today. Communication, how you communicate with people. There's so many things to think about, so many things to teach. I think it's sometimes it's overwhelming to plan and to implement everything completely.
Yeah.
So as people learning and navigating, through this coaching journey that we have to figure out, we have to identify the most important things about our job, about our mission as coaches. And you wrote a book called Building Champions. I know we've mentioned it before, but in that book you talk about what really matters, right?
Yeah, there's actually a chapter titled "What Really Matters."
Exactly, and in that chapter you use a very common scenario to relay the concept of what really matters as parents and coaches. Which if everyone out there doesn't realize, as parents, we are by default coaches.
Yes,
right.
It's a point that I made in I don't know if it was that chapter, but I actually said that our kids' first coach, is us, mom and dad, and so it's only natural for us to just always want to coach them up.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, it's definitely not. And the whys behind that's natural too. But that scenario that you use to kind of get that point across is the car ride home. And I wanted to open this episode of the Coaching Life, which we've entitled "What Really Matters," by talking about that perspective and your perspective on that car ride home.
Yeah, I wrote that chapter. I remember I was pondering what some of the car rides home felt like and sounded like back when I was coaching my son's travel ball teams. And this would have been between, ages 10, 11, 12, 13. We would often get in the car after a game, and it was funny because it's not funny, but it was interesting to me that the mood and the climate in that car was always dependent upon how he played.
Yeah.
And what I mean by how he played is not necessarily the important aspects of how he played.
Right.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
But how many hits he got, how many errors he made, how many pass balls he allowed, things like that.
Right.
And sometimes, the conversation also revolved around hustle. Also, hustle has always been a big sticking point with me. If you don't do it, then I'm getting on you pretty good about it. And if your effort isn't good, and I just found myself kind of one day. I remember this has been a few years ago now when I wrote this, but just going back to those times, and okay, I was 2 and 3. I was 3-4 years removed from it, and it just seems silly to me that I allowed our entire mood, and this, I'm talking about a car ride home. Often I'm talking about from the ballpark to the hotel. And so we're looking at 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and we're just 15 minutes or so after the game has ended. And I'm already starting in on him about what he could have done better.
Yeah.
And I realized that, as a 12-year-old, he's thinking about going to the pool here in just a few minutes.
I think he definitely was, right? Because that was one of his greatest memories, back at the episode
what he
that we had
told
Brock
us.
in.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's a good point. I don't think it's just in the car ride home either that you have those thoughts. And here's why: if you think about it, when you think back, and because I've done the same thing, when you replay it in your head, it's silly because nothing positive really ever comes from those moments that you're being negative in the car ride home. Nobody improves from that spot. You know what I mean?
It's not a good coaching time.
Right. And I kind of relate to the same thing, even during games. I remember reading the chapter for the first time and thinking about that. But it's kind of something that helped me redirect my focus in this situation. And you see this all the time in sports, youth sports specifically, when a kid makes a mistake on the field. Immediately, coaches, parents, anybody, they're screaming, you need to do this. You get your glove down. That ball needs to go to second base, whatever, immediately.
Instantaneously.
Yeah, and I thought, well, I hate that. I really started to go against that. So I thought I'm going to wait until those kids get in the dugout before anything. And really, even then isn't the best time. So, I think that
to point out the error or the mistake or the technique, the problem in their technique in that moment.
Yeah. Right, because at that time they're focused on, they should be focused on the next play. Right? So
that's what we tell them.
Exactly.
Isn't that funny?
Yes.
We'll tell them, hey, focus on the next play, next pitch. So what? Next pitch, right? Next play. But then when they get back in the dugout, we go over the last one they just made.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of coaches might object and say, well, Pat, when are we supposed to talk to him? When are we supposed to do it?
That's a great point.
It is a great question. It's a great point. And because we've talked about, we've had several episodes where we've talked about this, and I don't remember if we've mentioned this before, but I have an idea about this.
Okay. I do too, but
go ahead.
And we have talked about.
You
this
answer the
before.
question first.
We have talked about this. We've talked about in the form of unstructured free play a little bit, but these are the times where we can just sit back and watch and observe and make notes.
Notes.
This is when pen and paper comes into play.
In exactly the same way I was.
That's your practice plan, right?
Buy a notebook, a little one, put it in your pocket. Take little note cards with you.
And if you do that, one, it takes a little bit of the edge off the situation to begin with.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
And like I said, you develop your practice plan during these games. You're ready to go. You know what you need to work on for the next practice.
And here's what I always find happens to me as well. And when I say I'm speaking in the present tense because I still do this as one who has assisted the Athens softball team for the last couple of years, I always have a little moleskin notebook in my back pocket, or if I'm wearing shorts in my front pocket or wherever, just holding it. And when something happens that I am tempted to want to pull the person aside right then and coach them up or shout it, I get the notebook out. And it's funny because I had girls ask me, what were you doing in that notebook? And I said, well, I'm keeping notes of the game, and then we'll talk about it later. And what I find is that often the things that I write down in the heat of the moment, like, I can't believe they just did that. when it's time to go back and discuss it and to work on it, it's not nearly as big of a deal as it felt like it was in that moment.
Or you realize that this is something that you haven't worked on enough.
It's not their issue; it's my issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which really almost that's a way to look at it. Any mistake that happens during a game, that's a coaching issue.
The majority of the time, it's going to be a coaching issue.
Right.
The majority of the time, I would go with that. I would agree with that.
Yeah. So I think, to start out what we're talking about here today, there's never really a great time to emphasize negative points. You want to be positive. And
you know what's funny about that? I mean,
I do know what you're gonna say. I'm positive they screwed up. Good.
It's the difference is in if they're 0 for 4, you're a lot more tempted to want to talk about it in the car.
That's true.
If they're 4 for 4 that day, you might say, "Man, you had a great day. Let me get you some ice cream." That's what I meant. That, and the point that I was trying to make is, in that chapter and asking the question, what really matters, is we're communicating to them what really matters by the way that car ride feels. You know,
Right. Yeah.
We put so much emphasis on those data points of success.
Yeah.
That really might not be that. I mean, they already feel like crap that they're 0 for 4.
Right.
The truth is, the kid, sometimes we've said this 100 times. Sometimes the kid that's 4 for 4 really didn't maybe swing the bat all that great, and the kid that was 0 for 4 may have and just got unlucky. They're not always in control of the things that we tend to want to talk about in the car.
Right.
They're not in complete control of whether or not the team won or lost. They're not in complete control of whether or not they got 4 hits that day or didn't get any hits that day. They're not in complete control of where they played, you know, how much they played and things like that. And I know that sometimes the frustration that we feel toward our team's coach comes out in the car as well.
And towards the result of the game.
Towards the result of the game. Yeah. And so it just all comes out, and that whole climate. And really when you look back after 3 or 4 years and you think back through those conversations in the car ride home, those things really do not matter.
They don't.
They just don't.
What matters? What matters? There's people out there listening right now, and they're saying, wait a second, my kid goes 0 for 4 and makes an error in left field. How am I going to find any positive in that? You know, what matters?
Yeah, what criteria can we use for success? How about this? How did he react if he struck out 3 times? How did he react? What did it look like? When, you know, so if if your kid struck out 3 times, you can't always. It's going to happen. It's going to strike out a lot.
That's the game.
But how did he go back to the dugout? What was his attitude like going back to the dugout?
What was his attitude towards the next batter? Towards his teammate?
Towards his teammate. Was he back up on the fence cheering for that teammate? Because if you saw him react in that way, that's a very big positive. That you know what, you just failed and you were able to shake it. It maybe made you mad. It maybe made you upset at the moment. But I saw you go in there and set your helmet down, grab your glove and your hat, and get back up on the fence and cheer on your teammates. And I'm going to tell you, son, I'm proud of you for that.
Yeah.
Why can't we tell them that?
We should.
Yeah.
Because, you know.
And if they, let's say they reacted in the opposite manner.
Right.
Let's say they moped back to the dugout, or they looked at the umpire and had some few choice words for him, or they got back to the dugout and they slammed their helmet down and they sat down on the bench and they pouted about it. If you want to coach them up on something, later that night when you're getting ready to put them, say their prayers before bed, that might be a good time to bring that up. But again, I don't think it's appropriate in the car ride home or immediately afterwards, because they're not going to hear it in that point.
You're right.
But wait for a moment when they're going to hear it. And then, yes, if you want to coach them up on something, coach them up on their attitude and their effort.
Yeah, I completely agree. Effort's a huge thing. As they get back onto the field after the inning, are they sprinting onto the field? They have positive energy.
There are a lot,
And why is that so important? It's important because in life, we face those situations every day, and if we can't regenerate ourselves, we can't be energized and continue to push forward. We're gonna struggle a lot in life, because life is filled with failure and losing. That is what really matters, is those things that how we respond to challenge.
Let that control the climate in the car.
Yeah,
let that control the mood.
And hopefully, if as parents, as coaches, that isn't an issue. A lack of hustle, a lack of attitude. Those aren't issues that you hope to revisit often.
Right.
Those are the types of things that you hope that you're instilling all the time, and that your kid has, and you don't have to worry about those things. So if you don't have to worry about those negatives for concepts like that, that's all that's left is the positives, is reinforcing the positives in relation to those concepts.
And the things that you're identifying there when you're talking about the way that you reacted to negative experiences are things those are life lessons.
Yeah.
That's, if you want to coach them up, coach them in life. That's why, what's the title of this podcast?
Exactly.
Coaching Life.
Yeah.
Who cares that the fact that they struck out, or they didn't pitch as well that day, or they let a few balls go through their legs. That's going to happen. It's going to happen the rest of their life, regardless of what level they make it to. It's still going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what about the life lessons? Let's focus on those. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with having those discussions. But here, I think the criteria should be for whether or not you even should coached them up in the car, and I finally got this one right. I'll tell you a story.
Okay.
I'll say first what I think the criteria should be. I think they need to give you permission to speak about their performance before you say a word. I think that's important.
So, like, how did I do?
You need to let, yes. They need to let you know that they're ready to hear from you. And she won't mind if I share this story. If she does, I'll edit it out. My daughter, Kaylee, I remember right where we were at. Listen, basketball was a sport that I would say of the three sports that she played in high school, softball, volleyball, and basketball, she liked them in that order. I would say basketball was her least favorite, but it was one of the most fun sports for me to watch her play. It's really odd because I could tell that there were parts of her game that she struggled in, but she's so competitive that she wanted to do well in, but she didn't have as much confidence, and it made her work that much harder on the areas that she was pretty good in. And she had an interesting upbringing with basketball too, because when she was younger, she was the tallest girl on the team in 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade. And so clearly taller. I mean, so she began playing basketball at the low post, the 4 or 5 positions. And then when she gets to middle school, those things start to even out, but she's still more comfortable underneath. And so the 7th grade coach kind of has her play a little bit of forward and then bringing her out to the 3 position a little bit and teaching her how to shoot out there. But the handling of the ball, bringing the ball up the floor, things like that, being a guard, was not her thing. She did not know. It wasn't she couldn't do it. She dribbled the ball well. She was athletic enough to do that, but she was most comfortable bodying it up underneath and getting fighting for rebounds. All of a sudden, she gets to high school. Now she's one of the shortest girls on the team. She has to learn how to handle the ball, and so she played point guard her sophomore, junior, and then some her senior year as well, and. That's where I could tell she was uncomfortable. It was funny. I would watch her, and she really improved her shooting game and everything too. I would watch her pass the ball off to another guard, and then you would see her eventually just try to find her way closer to the basket because as soon as the shot went up, she had such great instinct for where the ball was going to go. She led her team in rebounds her junior and senior year, and she was one of the shortest girls on the team.
Yeah.
And she just loved getting inside. Had a lot of double doubles over those 2 years, and was really proud of her. However, I say all that so that I can say this: one night against Morgan, up in Morgan here in Ohio, she was having a terrible game. I mean, she had turned the ball over so many times, and it just seemed like the team they were playing was really talented, and so I think it intimidated the girls a little bit, and they played passive. And I'll speak for my own kid. I felt like she was playing passive, and it was eating me up. And April,
you weren't saying anything from the stands though.
I actually, I probably did. I don't want to say I wasn't, but I got better. I've gotten better at this. But it was so. Her mom takes up for her on a lot of things. Okay, I mean,
but
she's a mom's girl, and they love each other like crazy. But even on this night, her mom was like, "What's going on?" so I could tell. Okay, I'm validated in my thinking that this performance sucks. Let's just be honest.
Did you feel more fired up after you got that support?
Once I had the support from my wife, because I know we were walking to the car, and it was one of those nights where they were playing so far away from home, and it was a late night, and so the coach. I don't like this. Personally, I don't like allowing kids to ride home.
You want them to be on the bus.
I want them to ride the bus home. If I'm riding the bus as a coach, you're riding the bus too, and it's part of the whole high school experience.
I see that.
Yeah, so I never even allowed the sheet to go around. We're not doing it, but this particular coach did, and she
a lot did.
She had a lot of homework, and so we're like, okay, that's fine. But normally we'd say no, ride the bus home. So
that's another discussion because people would question why that's crazy.
There are reasons for it.
Yeah,
there are reasons for it,
yeah.
and it's just a personal thing. I don't care. I mean, I'm not against coaches that do that. It's fine. It's just a personal thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, on this night we allowed her to ride home with us. But on our way to the car, April, she kind of looked at me. She said, "Are you going to say anything? You're going to talk about, And I actually said, no, I'm not. The only way that I will say anything at all is if she gives me permission, if she asks me.
Okay.
And we get down the road. It's one of those drives, on back roads where it's just, it's a long drive back home. And we're 15 minutes into the drive, and if I remember correct, and if I'm incorrect here, she's going to point it out to me. But I think that April actually said, "So what'd you think of the game tonight, Kaylee?" Like she wanted so bad to talk about it. My wife's more competitive than I am. I'll tell you that right now. But it was just a poor performance by the whole team, and they needed people who were I would, even on the basketball court, even though she wasn't that's not her favorite sport. I would say that she was definitely a leader in the sense that the girls looked at her, that and what kind of effort she gave, they would follow her effort as well, and so sometime in that car ride, we got permission where she said, "Dad, what did you see?" And I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. Did you feel like, on the floor, did you feel like you were..."
I've said that, but
you were playing, with like just reckless abandon, like you were just giving everything that you had? And she said, "I just felt like sluggish tonight. Like she said, "Yeah, I guess I felt like I was giving my all, but it didn't feel the same." And I said, "Well, it didn't look the same." I said, it looked like, from our perspective, it looked like you guys were playing passive, and you in particular were hesitant to get down inside like you normally do, and and those kinds of. So then I'll tell you, that turned into be a really cordial, nice discussion about the game on the car ride home.
Yeah.
It was one of the best conversations that I've had with one of my children about their game that wasn't a positive one. The best ones are the positive ones. When they, she scores 14 points, has 12 rebounds, and the team wins, and those are fun. Those are awesome conversations. Those are easy to have. The conversation after that kind of a game is never easy, and therefore it shouldn't happen unless she asks for it. Yeah. And when she asks for it, it makes you a little more mindful, I think, of I guess being understanding. It made me want to ask her, "Well, how did you feel when you were playing? What you obviously felt like something wasn't right about the game. So let's see if we can figure this out together."
Yeah.
And there are a lot of components and variables that we talked about that night. Like we didn't feel like there was a good matchup here or there, and the defense. Maybe we I think we full court pressed all night long, and we only had about 5 girls that could really handle that kind of pressure up and down the floor, and so I think they got fatigued before the second quarter even, and they end up playing fatigued for 2 quarters, and it was different than what they normally did. They didn't normally full court press that often, and so things like that happened, but again, even that I had to be careful how we talked about that, because I had to be careful to not, even though I may have disagreed with the way her coach handled that aspect of the game, I didn't want her to feel like that in the conversation. Like I was, trying to devalue what her coaches, were doing and things like that. And so that's tough.
Yeah, there's a couple.
There are a lot of things that happen that's tough.
It's probably different for people to hear someone say that they disagree with a coach and not just out blast them. Just say the coach is horrible. It's okay to disagree with things. Mm-hmm. And
we're going to.
Yeah, we're going to. It's a fact of life. But the other thing I would say is, it's easy to forget that they're kids. Yeah. And they're not just kids. They're kids learning to be adults. And they're experiencing things every day of their life that maybe they've never experienced before. And sometimes they just feel bad. I think, or don't feel right. Don't feel like...
Yeah, she couldn't even explain it that night.
Yeah, and sometimes
I don't know what it was.
Right.
I just felt sluggish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget that, because we're displaced from it so much.
And when I heard her say that, it made me feel a lot better. Because I'm like, okay, you didn't choose to not hustle then. Something was off tonight. Your game was off. All right, we'll move on. No big deal.
Yeah.
It happens.
It does.
It happens.
It does. We have to be, we have to understand that and be ready to respond to that in a way that we think is beneficial. Being negative about it is really not going to accomplish much.
We have to be intentional about it. What I mean by intentional is we have to... I would never have responded the way I did had I not intentionally made a decision to not speak about her game unless she asks me.
Right.
Like even when my wife asked me, "Hey, are we going to talk about the game?" I made a decision. No, we're not.
Yeah.
Unless she asked me. I'm not going to get in the car and be fuming, and just not talk to anyone and then make it obvious that, hey, I want to talk about the game.
Yeah.
But we're just going to be normal. And if it happens to come up, I will ask if you want me to share my thoughts, I will.
Yeah. It probably sounds silly to some people. And so we ask our kids to go through a routine to prepare to play, right? To get your mind right. But how many of us as coaches and parents go through a routine to get our minds right on how we respond to things that happens in the games and how we're going to respond after?
Yeah.
That's such a great idea. In the next chapter of the book, it's titled "I Love Watching You Play."
Yeah.
And
kind of segues right into that.
Right. And how, why are we even there? We're there because we're parents.
Yeah.
Or because we're individuals that have an investment in the development of these kids, going into adulthood.
Yeah.
I've got an example, and I said it for a while. I don't know that it's really still true, but I do think it was true in our area. Soccer became real big for a short amount of time a few years ago. I remember Jake, he might have been, my oldest son might have been 7 or 8, and everyone seemed to be playing soccer.
In your particular area of the world.
Yeah. And it never really, I think it's been there here and there, but, a league popped up and, had all these kids interested in playing the league. And I think one of the main appealing factors, there was a couple, but it was mainly the parents didn't know anything about soccer.
Yeah.
Right? So they weren't, during the games, they weren't screaming. They weren't arguing about the coaches.
Yeah.
They really didn't care what the kids were doing. Really, playing time wasn't as big a deal.
Because they didn't know what to say.
They didn't know, right? But why were they there, Coach? They were there as parents.
Yes.
And even as coaches that would coach the soccer teams during that period, they really weren't, soccer experts. They would come into the day think, I'll show them some stuff, but, who really cares? They're just going to play.
Right.
And the kids loved it. And I thought, that's a great
What is that
way.
noise? Is that in here? Is that in our studio?
I don't know. I think it was someone drilling something or something.
Yeah. Huh, that's odd. Do you remember where you're at?
I don't. I think I got everything out.
Well, you're alluding to, you're not alluding to it, you're just flat out talking about it. But I did tell a story in that chapter, I Love Watching You Play, about an encounter that I had with another father at a showcase event.
Right.
And this exact thing happened. And I don't know why I never considered this before, but it struck me. And I remember thinking about this, ironically enough, on the drive home from that event, because it was at Wright State University, and it's about 2.5 hour drive from our house. And I took my son over to a showcase event, and this is when he was working through his recruiting process. And I'm I'm standing there in the stands, or in the stadium there, just watching the whole event take place. And this dad recognizes me because I may have had an Athens shirt on or something like that. And his son played for Marietta, which are two schools that happened. We met in the regional tournament 2 years in a row and had a lot of competitiveness, against each other. And we actually played, our Brock's class actually played against a lot of kids in that class since the time they were 7 years old. So there was a lot of someone's doing some construction that's near our studio.
Better be
so
union.
if this shows up in the recording, oh well. So anyway, back to my story. I was talking to him, and his son is an excellent baseball player. He would have been probably one of the top infielders in our district. His senior year was all district for two years in a row. I believe he may have been his sophomore year as well. Very, very good player. He should be a junior this year at Marietta College, and I think his freshman year he actually, I don't know if he started the season there, but by the end of the season, I believe he was playing shortstop for them. He's good, and so I'm talking to his dad. Find out, his dad works at Marietta College. I work at OU, and we're talking, and we're talking a little bit about that, and then we're talking a little bit about baseball, and I kind of tell that okay, through conversation that he probably hasn't ever coached. I could tell that he's just been a dad. And as we were talking more about the game, the conversation didn't really go anywhere. And finally, he said to me, "Hey, I'll just be honest with you. I don't have an athletic bone in my body." He said, "I've never played sports. I've never played baseball a day in my life," which I found to be fascinating because his son is so good at it. So whatever he got his genes, it didn't come from dad. But he said, "Here's the thing. I have attended every single one of my son's games since he was little, and I just love watching him play." And that's what made me. I know it's become a catchphrase today. I love watching you play, and it's there are a lot of campaigns about that out on social media. But that phrase stuck with me, and it made me want to name this chapter that. And he went on to explain to me how he actually, granted you'd think, well, if you went to all your son's games from the time he was little, you'd eventually know something about the game.
Right.
But he actually told me that he was intentional to not learn much about the game of baseball. One, he didn't have much interest. The only interest he had in baseball was the fact that his kid played. Mm-hmm. And so he said, I didn't want to learn much about the game because I felt like the more I knew about the game, the more expectations I would have on my son. And I did not want to replace his enjoyment. I didn't want to remove his enjoyment of the game by me placing so many expectations on him.
That's heavy.
It is. It is. And he went on to say this, and I tried to quote him as closely as possible as saying this: "The more I learned about the game, the more tempted I would be to begin shouting expectations from the stands. My son doesn't need that from me. He just needs me to be his biggest fan." Mm-hmm. I was up there talking to him. I about started crying because he was his whole demeanor and perspective of being a dad whose kid plays ball was opposite of what mine had been up to that point. Mm. And I loved that perspective.
That is a great perspective. And really, you don't have to exclude yourself from understanding the game or loving the game to have that perspective.
Right.
You just have to understand priority.
Yeah.
And what really matters.
Yeah. Because I don't want to be that way. I love the game.
Yeah.
I've always told my kids, whether you play or not, I'm going to probably coach.
Yeah.
I'm going to watch baseball. I love the game.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be that way, but I want to be that way in the sense that I want his perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a dad.
It's good stuff. I mean, all the other things that we talk about are relevant. How the technique and the data and the mm-hmm. stats and are
people might be surprised at how much you and I actually do talk about that because we talk more about the technique and data and coaching points outside of the podcast studio, and but we come in here, we talk about this stuff a little bit more because I think this is the most important stuff to talk about.
Exactly.
And you can get the other stuff anywhere.
Yeah.
But the stuff that seems like guys and gals and people who are coaching need to be reminded of more is this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to what I was saying about soccer and how the soccer experience that I was talking about and how we have to prepare ourselves to be good coaches or, parents.
Have a plan, have a system for the way you're going to respond
and change your perspective a little bit. And, how do we do that? And we talked about coming into this that we were going to talk about two chapters, but as I was reading through and just doing a little bit of research, I did glance over at the next chapter, which we've talked about before, and the next chapter is titled "A Different Perspective," and you give this great. You talked about what the kids expect out of us when we're in the stands, but you also gave a great scenario that impacted me personally because I remember being at a Sandlot or a 10U travel game, and you were there. We were talking to each other, and you were talking to me about this concept. And during that game, what I saw a kid in one inning. Probably, I think he made 4 errors, and they were tough plays.
It was a 10U game.
Right.
Right.
They were tough plays. Off the end of his glove, hard, bad bounce, whatever. But he made 4 errors, and he And the reason we were talking about is because when you came over, you said something like, I heard that he had a rough inning. And I said, well, I was kind of sticking up for him. You know what I mean? And the catch is I minimized those mistakes because I was not invested in that game as, say, I would have been if that was my son. If that was my son, it would have probably been a bad moment for me as a parent and for him as a player. I probably wouldn't have handled it well.
Yeah.
Right? But because I was not invested in that game, I had a different perspective. So I think, going out, if people's out there listening and they're like, hey, man, I want to be, a better, but I don't know how to do it. I think a great starting point is to go find a 10U game or go find an 8U game and just watch it by yourself. And
find one that you don't know anyone playing.
Yeah.
You don't know any of the parents and you don't know any of the umpires.
Yeah.
You have nothing vested in that game, in that experience at all.
Right. I'm getting goosebumps because I'm getting to a point that I want to make. But, you go do that. And like you said, the umpires won't be as bad.
Yep.
Right. They'll be much more fair. Right. You'll see them giving a lot more effort than what you do. The coaches won't be as bad.
Or you won't care as much.
And you won't care as much
about the umpires'
What
calls.
will you care about? You'll care about the enjoyment of the game. You'll care about watching these kids play baseball. Yeah. And the point I want to make about the 10U kid is this. This is what we miss. This is what we miss when we're so invested and we let it drive, the way we respond negatively. We miss that what this kid did. He was a great teammate. He hustled off the field. He hustled on the field. He actually got moved to a different position. His body language was still positive. He still fought. He cheered his teammates on. And let me tell you, from an outsider's perspective, I learned more about that kid.
Yep.
In that moment, in how he responded to that failure, than if he would have scooped those ground balls up and made the plays, because what he told me was he's a winner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And those are the types of people in life that we want on our side. Those are the type of people in life when we go out and we're trying to find people, to fill positions and fill leadership roles. Those are the types of people that we want. And if we're so invested in the game that we are rehashing these negative points, it's so easy to miss.
And that's all we're thinking about. Yeah, it's easy. Man, that's a great point, Pat.
Yeah.
That's what we miss. Ask yourself, what am I missing in this? What am I missing because I'm so focused on something that doesn't matter as much?
Right. There's things that matter much more.
Yeah. Yeah, when you go out and you find a game to watch that you don't, it's happening to me right now. We're going, I'm going tonight to a football game. I've got no interest at all. No, I've got no kids playing, and I'm going to hear people shouting at refs, and it's going to be funny to me. Is what it is. I'm just going to shake my head probably and say, "Yeah, boy, just wait until your kids are all gone, and now you're watching this game. It's really not. It's not much to get that bent out of shape about." It's so hard to have that perspective when you do have a child playing there. I mean, it is so protective, that the umpire made a bad call against him. Therefore, the umpire's cheating, and he hates us, and he hates my kid, and he hates my family, and I hate him. When I told that story in that chapter about watching the game, that I didn't have anything. I was in another town. I had no idea. I didn't know anybody in that town even, and just watching the game. I'm sure there was a bad call or two, but I never got the sense that the umpire was cheating. Right. I got the sense that the umpire,
it's a crazy thought when you're removed from it.
Yeah.
But I understand, like you said, it is difficult, and that investment gets to us. But if we're going to get better at it, we do have to, devote ourselves to getting better. We expect our kids, like I said earlier, we expect our kids to become better hitters. Tacklers, shooters, whatever it is. And we're like, have you worked on this? Have you worked on this? So you get angry with them. What are you thinking here? What are you thinking there? There's all this stuff that goes into it. But are we asking ourselves the same questions? And I would say, we don't enough.
Yeah.
Definitely. But we have to. If we're going to
And what kind of questions are those?
Well,
as a coach, am I becoming a better person?
Yeah.
What am I doing intentionally to be a better person? To be because one, if you're getting to be a better person, you're going to be a better coach.
True.
If you help a kid be a better person, he's going to be a better player and a better teammate. And so let's go back and start there. What are you doing? What was the last 3 books that you read?
Yeah, great
mom,
point.
dad, coach, because that's going to help you. It's going to help you be a better person. It's going to help you have better perspective on things. And, if we're not being intentional about those kinds of things, then that's when we lose perspective and we get so focused in the smallest things that don't matter much in life become the biggest things to people.
Right.
And I mean, you notice that. I mean, there are people, you go to ball games. I remember there was a kid whose dad was a biochemical engineer, had a lot of stuff on his plate, a lot of stuff on his mind, and he would come to the games and he would never say a word about the game. I mean, he would never, and he knew baseball, but I remember this dad. He would just enjoy the game, and I wonder, well, what is it? Well, because he's got a better perspective on things. He's got a much bigger perspective. I'm not saying that people who are more intellectual don't yell as much. We know that's not true. I've seen the opposite of that too. But I think sometimes when you have a bigger perspective on life in general, it helps to make little things like games be put in the place they should be put in.
Yeah.
Which is a smaller place, and the importance of stuff that we get passionate about.
Definitely. So how do you grow your perspective? Just like you said, you read books, you listen to podcasts
like
right?
this one. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Share it.
You communicate.
I brought a point up a couple weeks ago that I know both of us have thought about, and that is how do we expand our listenership in this podcast to the places
right.
and the people that need it most.
Yeah, exactly.
Because people who need it most aren't listening to podcasts.
Right.
They're not reading books. They're not seeking training for themselves. But we want, how do we change that?
Yeah.
How do we make it happen? And maybe that's something that you guys that are listening and you people that are listening to this can help us with. If you're a high school coach, you have a lot more influence than what you might realize to suggest things and to, heck, if you're involved in your town's youth league, you can require certain things. You could say, hey, listen, if you want to coach, here's some things that I'm going to give you. There's some resources I'm going to give you, and we're going to talk about them in our coaches meetings. Or I don't know how things work in your towns, but there's got to be ways for us to get people the training and to give them, I guess, the perspectives that you and I are talking about. And it's not just about us. We're talking about anything. Put anything in their hands. I don't care what it is. But we just try to take the best of what we've learned and put it into these podcast episodes. And I think the feedback that we're getting from people that are listening is good. It's positive in the sense that, hey, yeah, we're hearing people say, I wish a lot of people would listen to this. And we know that it's growing because we're seeing that we have a way of looking at those analytics a little bit. But man, I think so much more could be done.
Yeah, I think it's one of the challenges that we have is people are really guarded about knowledge about these types of things, and they don't want to listen. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're sharing stuff like that, an immediate rejection might not go over too well for you. You don't really want that. You're kind of, like I said, you're guarded towards that. Mm. But like for me, I've been ever since we've been doing the podcast, I've been telling everybody, hey, do you listen to this podcast? Do you listen to this? Go listen to that. Not just ours. I'm talking about,
Yeah, if you don't like ours, there might be one out there that you do.
There definitely is.
Yeah.
There's podcasts about everything out there. You know what I mean? There's just all kinds. But that we just got to continue to push and to let people know there's information out there. YouTube videos, right, all over the place. Now you get to a certain point where you have to decipher the information. You have to be able to pick which ones are valuable to you and which ones not. But that's the other end of the spectrum.
Something's better than nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
You will figure out what's good information and what's not the more you dive into it.
Yeah. Well, the more
you
funny?
listen to it.
In this point was a couple episodes ago we talked about strength training. And I know both of us did this to prepare for that because one of the drawbacks or one of the negatives with strength training is it's not good for you as a kid. But Google search it. Mm-hmm. You will never find that.
Yeah. In fact, there was a moment in an earlier podcast where we talked about that, and I agreed with it. And
Oh.
then 2 or 3 weeks later, when you and I did some more
Oh, because
research,
you're like not 8 or 9, not 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember which one it was, but we were talking with a coach. It was either Coach Dunphy or Coach Rourke, where we're talking, what age should we begin and things like that. Well, I don't know about lifting weights as a younger kid or whatever. And I was like, I wouldn't do that either. And then just a couple weeks later, when we're preparing to talk about strength training, and I'm talking with people who actually do this for a living and looking it up, and you realize, actually, there's really nothing about that.
No, actually, Mayo
and so
Clinic, American Pediatrics Academy, they all say 7, 8 years old.
Exactly.
Strength training.
Yeah, it's all right. And so that we are an example of someone who, just inside of this own podcast, within a matter of a couple of weeks, we changed our method of thinking about something. And I actually think the strength training podcast came out, the episode came out before. And so, before the one, I think it was when we were talking with Coach Rourke, because we asked, what age should girls begin strength training? And we talked a little bit about not using weights until, puberty or whatever. And there's just really no science about that. There's no science there's no medical science that says that would be a bad thing for somebody.
No.
And again, you got to go back and listen to the entire strength training episode, because we talk about the importance of understanding, being able to do body weight stuff and good form and things like that. We don't want to rehash that now, but the point is, we changed.
Yeah.
We changed our mind.
That's life, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's how we live, and we shouldn't be so, I won't say scared, but we shouldn't be so objective to that idea.
So egotistical.
It's
egotistical.
Yeah.
And people who play sports are egotistical.
Yeah.
We got big egos.
Nature. That's a good point. Yeah. We have,
Athletes
there has to be you almost have to have that
Yeah.
a little bit, overconfidence or whatever. But, so, what's our listeners up to? 100 or how many listens do we have?
As of this point, I think there's 22 states are represented in our listenership, which is good. We're almost half the country.
Three different countries: the United States, Canada, and UK.
Yeah.
And over 1,000 listens, right? So far in total.
We're 1,300 or so.
Yeah.
We're getting close to that number right now. It's growing by 100 listens. It seems like a week.
Yeah, we love the listens.
And
everyone out there.
We want the subscribers.
We do. We want you to get get your platform client out there, your Spotify or
Stitcher, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Overcast, whatever it is you're using.
I forgot which one I was using.
Yeah. The thing is, it's free. This is a free resource.
Right.
We're not doing that. We're not making money doing this. We're not doing this. This is not.
We're not yet. Someday I'm going to retire doing this. So
there you go. Yeah, we're not going to say we'll never try to get sponsorships, things like that. But right now, we're just doing this out of the goodness of our hearts, because we love coaching, we love people, we love kids, and we love talking. And so we put that.
We did it
together.
anyway. We were doing it anyway, right? We would have had really. We're having this conversation with microphones in front of us. That's the only difference. Otherwise, we'd be somewhere else.
Texting it or sitting having lunch, something, eating wings, and talking about it. But
right. But we want to help, and we want people out there to understand that, get as many resources as you can, to help yourself get better as a parent, as a coach, as a person. And, that's what we want to do.
Yeah. You asked a question earlier, how can we make sure that we are focusing on the right things, focusing on having the perspective like the dad that didn't know anything about baseball, but just loved watching his kid play, and he had a better perspective. But how can those of us who do like the game and who do want to learn about the game and who do coach the game, how can we make sure that we're keeping that perspective? I actually had a little test that I started giving myself after I learned this particular thing from a coach that I really look up to, and a coach that has been a mentor to me, but I've never met him. I've just read about him, and I studied a lot of the things that he's written and watched a lot of videos of him talking, and that's Coach John Wooden. And I've talked about John Wooden a lot over my lifetime of coaching, because he's been one of the greatest influences for me as a coach. And I'm very proud of that, because I can't think of a better character, better man who coached a game but coached people. And I wrote a chapter actually in my second book called Coaching Life, which actually probably is just a continuation of the first book. I should have been a little more patient in putting out the first book, because everything that's in here probably should have gone in the first one. Maybe I'll do a second edition and actually combine these two. I don't know. But,
I don't know. I like them as separate
okay.
entities. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this chapter is actually called the Building Champions Test. And what I wrote about was that I decided to give myself a test, and this test came from something that John Wooden said, and it actually isn't original with Wooden. It originated with a coach that John Wooden had himself. And what happened was, in an interview, someone asked him how UCLA was going to be this year. What's the team going to look like this year? That was kind of the question. Hey, coach, what's the team going to look like this year? And he responded by saying, I don't know yet. Ask me in 30 years.
Oh.
And the reason why that resonated with me so much is because the perspective that Coach Wooden always had on his teams and his players was that you cannot measure the success of these gentlemen by what we do on the court this year.
Yeah.
You're going to measure their success and whether or not I was successful at coaching them by what they're doing in 20 years.
And this is a guy that all his programs did was win.
Oh, my gosh.
He dominated.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know,
legendary coach. And so I created this little thing called the Building Champions Test, because and the reason we call it the Building Champions Test is because that's what Coach Wooden's goal as a coach was. It wasn't he won championships, but I think his greater goal was to build champions.
He says that. Yeah, he says
he
that.
actually says that. Yeah. So did I steal that unknowingly? I must have stolen that.
Building champions.
So
I don't think I don't know that he says building champions, but
that's,
if you read John Wooden books,
oh yeah, you get that.
He's talking about personal development.
Yeah.
That's what the books are about. You pick it up as a basketball person.
Oh,
you read a lot about it.
Yeah. Well, here's how it works. And you have to ask yourself, as a coach, you have to ask yourself this question every single day. You have to hold this question up to everything that you plan in your practices, everything you plan in your day, every speech that you give to your teams, everything. Every time you coach someone up, just remember this. Let this question, this test, this Building Champions test be the theme of your coaching. And that question is just simply this: what am I doing today that is going to help people I lead to be successful in 20 years? What am I doing? Because if you're not spending any of your time coaching, if you're not spending any of your time focusing on those things, then you're not really, you're coaching a game. You're not coaching life.
Yeah.
And that's what coaching is truly about, coaching life.
Yeah, I don't know how. I do know how, because I was. I don't know if it's a change of a perspective or maybe a little bit mature. My perspective changed a lot when I became a parent. Mm-hmm. But when I started coaching, it was about the X's and O's.
Yeah.
It was about the technique and the strategy and the game.
I think it happens to a lot of people. I mean,
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons that practices aren't. People say, I don't like practice. Coaches, you'll hear coaches say, I don't practice. I don't like practice. I like the games. It's because of, that perspective. That, I'm there to coach a game.
Yeah,
you're not coaching a game,
right?
You're coaching people.
Yeah. And honestly, practice. You talk about coaching people and relationship building. There's a lot more opportunity for that interaction in practice, before practice, during practice, after practice. And you find, I think, as you get older, as your perspective changes, as you shift into understanding more that coaching is about people, it's about coaching people and helping to develop people, practices become more important to you, because it's during practice when you have those kinds of interactions more often. During a game, you're so focused on, they're focused on the game as they should be, you're focused on the game as you should be, and you don't get those relationship interactions as much as you do. Right. I would walk around. I intentionally did not pitch batting practice the last 2 years that I've coached baseball. And I love pitching batting practice. I love it. I mean, I love keeping the old arm fresh.
Is that the ego coming out a little bit?
Right. Yeah, here, try to hit this kid. But we would have college student helpers come out. And it was a perfect task for them to take on. They pitched. They love throwing and they love being involved. And so pitching BP was perfect. And during BP, that would be my time to just walk around. And I would be in the outfield. I would be during all of our stations, wherever the guys were, I'd stop, and the ones that weren't actively doing something in that moment, I'd just stop and chat, and we would just talk about how school was that day, what kinds of things are going on at home. You're pretty energized about the game this week. What are you nervous about? Things, and we would just talk. And those are moments that I cherish as a coach, that I appreciate more now than I ever did before, and it makes me want to. I can't wait to get back into it because I want that again. I need that. That fuels me. That kind of stuff energizes me. And so this little podcast I'll have to do until I get back on.
So I'm glad we can talk to it a little bit. So hey, we had a good talk today. Glad everyone could join us.
I enjoyed it. Whether this is,
I had a great time today. It was good stuff. I think I laughed and I cried and learned a little bit too. So it was a good day. But appreciate everyone out there. We'll look for you on the next episode. Thanks again.